So good to be here with you today. It's a wonderful day here. Yesterday, as I listened to the speakers and participated in the event, this thought struck me, that the power of a group is a function of the purity of its motives. And if that's true, this is a very powerful place to be. I feel like I want to be a better man, so thank you for your influence on me. I want to share with you today a principle of leadership and a principle of life that is so profound in its effect and so pervasive in its influence that it literally shapes your world. So if you consider yourself a leader, this will define the focus of your leadership. If there were one thing you could do that would dramatically improve the quality of your relationships, the strength of your teams, or the effectiveness of your organization in accomplishing its mission, this one principle will be that focus. So that's what we're going to do today. That's what we'll focus on, and I need you to get ready for that kind of a journey. So you're going to need a couple of things, something to write on and something to write with. The second thing you're going to need is a learning buddy. So look to your left and right and find the most intelligent person seated adjacent to you. Buddy up with them and let's go. Tough choice. All right, everybody got a buddy? Feel free to move if you need to, but... All right, well, let me begin here. The most crucial conversation of my life, at least up to that point, took place on December 28th, 2009. Now, I'm going to change some cosmetic features of this story for reasons that will become immediately obvious to you as I share. But the conversation actually didn't begin December 28th. It began 10 years earlier. I met Patrick when he was 12 years old. He was a young scout, and I was a scout leader. I got to know him well. We played a lot, and over a couple of years, hung out quite a bit, camped a lot, had a lot of fun times together. And then after a couple of years, he disappeared. And I became concerned. So I started asking some of his colleagues about him, and they seemed a little offish about answering. Finally, I cornered one, and I asked what happened to Patrick. Well, he hung his head, and he said, I think Patrick is doing drugs. Well, I was hurt and worried, and I tried to find Patrick, but he avoided me. And over the next year or so, I finally gave up. It's now 10 years later. It's a Saturday in 2009. I'm sitting on my couch when there's a knock at the door. I move to the front door, I open it up, and there's this bedraggled, kind of weather-beaten, worn-looking character standing there. His mouth was agape. He said nothing, just stared at me, and I was a little uncomfortable, but finally, I saw something around the eyes, and then eventually around the cheekbones, and suddenly this recognition washed over me. I clapped him on the shoulders. I said, Patrick, it's so good to see you. I dragged him in and dropped him on the couch. And I said, catch me up. Over the next hour or so, he poured forth this story of torment, of bad decisions, of addiction, of jail time, eventually prison time. And then he got to his point. He said, I'm tired of this. I want to turn my life around. And I don't really have many people I can come to for advice. But I always respected you. And I thought, perhaps. And I smiled and said warmly to him, I'll be happy to help. Over the next hour, we talked about some of his challenges. We created a plan. He needed to get a job. He had fines to pay off. And so he did. He got a job, began paying off his fines, checked in with me regularly, and was making wonderful progress. About 3 months later, he came and said, I'm working at a minimum wage job. If I had transportation, I could get to this construction job about 40 miles away. So we brainstormed another plan, and I co-signed for a loan, and he got an old beater truck, and he got this construction job, and he started making progress, and things were going really well, and then he disappeared. Now, I didn't connect the dots, but in about October of that year, our house was burglarized. And it was troubling to me for many reasons. Of course, this violation of having somebody intrude on our sacred space, but secondly, I worried for the security of my family. And so my wife and I went and got surveillance equipment so that we could feel safe and secure, particularly while I traveled. It's hard to describe to you the feelings I had when in November of that year our house was burglarized for the second time. But this time there was evidence of the burglary. I was able to watch Patrick go into the backyard, drop into a window well, and emerge later with some of our valuables. Now it's December 28th of 2009. I'm driving not far from our house, and I see Patrick walking along the sidewalk. So I pulled up next to him, I rolled down the window, and I said, "Hey, Patrick." When he recognized who it was, his eyes got big, and he seated himself down as though he was about to sprint. I said, "Patrick, it's okay. You don't need to run." I said, "I just want to talk. All I want to do is talk." Well, finally, his shoulders slumped as though in defeat. He came and opened the door, sat in the car. We drove back to my house, went down into the basement, and sat in our chairs. About 30 years ago, as we began our research, we asked a question. The question that's driven our focus, that's driven our attention, is, are there a few moments of what we call disproportionate influence? Are there some moments in your life, in your leadership, and in your organization that matter more than any others? And if so, what are those moments? Are there just a few which, if you behave, if you show up in a certain way, there's a dramatically different outcome in the quality of your relationships, in the performance of a team, and even in the performance of an entire organization? All right, now it's time for you to play the game. So I want you with your buddy to make a quick decision. Who is person A and who's person B? If one of you is an introvert, pick B, okay? So pick an A and a B between the two of you. Fast decision, fast decision. All right. Now let me reassure you, it's a simple task. Low fat, low calorie, non-addictive. Very simple task. Okay, person A, raise your hand. Person A. All right. Person A, for just a moment, I want you to be Nurse Bonnie. You're the woman in the left in the video that you're about to watch. Person B, raise your hand. Person B. It's very good. It's about half the room. Okay? So person B, your name is Dr. Scott. You're the guy on the right in the video up here. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to play Avatar for a moment. I'm going to play this scene. Those two people are going to play you. You're going to let the scene develop, and as soon as the video stops, the avatars disappear, you go back into your bodies, and you become Nurse Bonnie and Dr. Scott. So here's the challenge. Those of you who are Nurse Bonnie, raise your hand. Nurse Bonnie. Okay, those of you who are Nurse Bonnie, as soon as the video stops, I want you to turn to Dr. Scott and say the next thing you would say if you were her in these circumstances. No rehearsal, no prep, one line, that's all you get, okay? Here you go.
Can I get you to check in on Mr. Gonzalez before you take off? He's the older gentleman who had the punctured lung. We're hoping to release him.
I can't. I got to get to my son's music assembly. Just, I don't know, just tell him something came up and I'll come back tonight and check on him.
Actually, his family's all here expecting to take him home. I told him you were just down the hall. Please, it'll only take a minute.
You told him what?
I assumed it would be okay. I thought you'd be right in.
Oh, you thought? And where did you learn to think? Certainly not some 2-year rinky-dink nursing school, that's for sure.
All right, go. Back into your bodies. What do you say next? Where did you learn to think? All right. One sentence only, one sentence. Back off, Nurse Bonnie. All right. Now, it'd be fun to listen in on all of those various responses, but I've done this over the years a variety of times. That's from a real circumstance, something we watched in our research. We actually watched that doctor interact with that Nurse Bonnie, and we were watching her for a very particular reason. But let me ask you about your response. How many of you began with the phrase, "up yours"? How many of us started there? All right, no. Okay, we're in a sacred environment. Now, how many of you, while not saying those words, were thinking those words? How many of us were? Yeah, all right. So here's the issue. The issue is that these are emotionally complex moments. Remember our thesis question. We're wondering, are there a few moments that matter more than any others? And time again, we found that there are moments defined by 3 dimensions that have a disproportionate effect on the durability of your marriage, the happiness of your marriage, the strength of your executive team, the performance of your organization in executing on its mission. And these are those dimensions. First, these are moments where there's some issue that's very high stakes to you. Second, you come into these moments expecting somebody else to disagree with you. That causes you to behave differently than you otherwise would. And finally, these are moments of strong emotion, triggered emotions. So those three dimensions, high stakes, opposing opinions, strong emotions, cause these moments to be different than any other. And the effect of how you behave in those moments carries on long past that moment. Let me back you up to the moment that we just watched. So we did research in healthcare environments, among many other industries. And let me ask you for just a second to speculate on that interaction between Nurse Bonnie and Dr. Scott. How many of you think that the way that plays out could profoundly affect Nurse Bonnie's satisfaction with her job? How many of you think it would? Yeah. So this is a no-brainer. But let's be even more interesting here. How many of you think that could also affect, let's say, patient safety? How many of you think it could? How many of you think it could affect trust in an entire team? How many of you think, yeah? Because this leaks out, right? That story travels. Now, here's a more complicated one. How many of you think it could affect physician satisfaction? How many of you think that? Yeah, our research shows, in fact, it does. Because how that plays out will come back to Dr. Scott as well, not just Nurse Bonnie. It gets complicated. Here's what I want you to do. For just a moment, I want you to think of the name of somebody about whom you've drawn a negative conclusion. Now, if it's somebody you're seated next to, pick another one just for the moment. But think of the name of somebody about whom you've drawn a negative conclusion. Think about it. Could be a customer, supplier, could be a boss, direct report, could be a spouse, could be a child, could be a neighbor. Doesn't matter. Think of somebody. Raise your hand if you can think of somebody. Don't point at them. Just raise the hand. Good. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the fact that we have concerns and challenges, problems with other people. The challenge becomes how we handle them. See, here's the issue. What we know from our research is this. The big idea here, the first big idea I want to share, is that anytime you find yourself stuck with a chronic problem in a relationship, a team, or an organization, anytime you're not reaching the potential of your performance as an organization or a team, or the potential of a relationship, there are always crucial conversations we're either not holding or not holding well. That's the principle. The diagnostic principle for us as leaders is when we find we're not achieving our potential to step back and ask, what's the crucial conversation we're either not holding or not holding well? To present it graphically, let's take a look at this. So I want you to imagine this is you. Now, the way life works is that as you're walking along and moving towards some super awesome goal, something you'd like to achieve, that's when problems begin. Many of us wish that we could create a life where we had fewer crucial conversations. How many of us would like that? Would you like to have fewer? The best way to do that is to have a meaningless life. So as soon as you give up on super awesome goals and don't care about missions and visions and things like that, you have a lot fewer crucial conversations. But as soon as you start caring about something, then something else starts to happen. Let me describe it with an experience that I had. So I've written collaboratively with my partners over the past 24 years. One of them, Carrie Patterson, and myself work together a lot. We have a process we use. One or the other of us will write the first draft of a chapter, and then we send it to the other for rewrites. And then we set up a time to talk and give each other feedback. That's the process. So at one point, Carrie had taken first draft on a chapter. He sent it to me. I did some very aggressive rewrites. I emailed it to him. It's now 7 o'clock on a Saturday evening. We've scheduled a time to talk. So I called him. He picks up the phone. I said, hey, Carrie, now a good time? Yeah, now's a good time. I said, did you get the chapter back? He said, I did. I said, what did you think? He said, you ruined it. I said, I didn't ruin it. I fixed it. He said, you didn't fix it. It's now all disjointed. It goes from A to C to B, and it doesn't work anymore. Now, did you time that? How long did that take? It took 4 seconds for the conversation to go from casual to crucial. Now, the irony here is that conversation took place while we were writing crucial conversations. It was high stakes. It was very important emotionally to us. We had opposing opinions coming in. And finally, that provoked an emotional response from it. When conversations turn from casual to crucial, the irony is that when it matters most, you and I tend to do our worst. And that's why these moments matter so much. So I want you to think for just a moment about that person about whom you've drawn a negative conclusion. Then turn to your partner. All I want you to do is share one brief thing. Don't tell them who it is. Don't give them background. I don't want you to disclose inappropriate information. All I want you to do is share the answer to this question. How is it affecting your behavior? Give one example of how you're behaving differently towards that person because of the concerns you have with them. Take 30 seconds. Just share one example. Okay, good. How many of you could see at least one example of how it's affecting your behavior? How many of us could see that? Very good. If you can't see it yet, keep looking, keep watching. Now, here's the most important question. How many of you could see that the way you're behaving probably isn't helping? Can any of you see that? Yeah, here's the point. If it's not possible to have fewer crucial conversations without just having a meaningful life, then the point here is we're going to confront them. Along our journey to some super awesome goal, they will always occur, and there's nothing wrong with that. Life is working fine. In fact, I believe there's a God-ordained purpose to crucial conversations. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But once you come to them, you have only two options. You can talk it out. That's an option. You can talk it out. You can find a way to absolutely honestly and absolutely respectfully share your concerns. You can try to find that way. But for the most part, we don't talk it out. If you don't talk it out, you don't get to vote on whether you do the second thing. You will do it. If you don't talk it out, you will act it out. It will show up in your behavior, and that will provoke behavior in response. And it always gets worse. Talk it out or act it out are the only two options available. Now, just since many of us don't have full-time work in a church environment, I thought, well, I wonder if there are crucial conversations in church leadership. What do you think? Possibly. Well, a few hundred folks were kind enough to participate in a little study with us of churches. We asked the question, are there some crucial conversations you're facing now? Here's some typical responses. A staff member is too old to continue in position. There's the precipice, right? So we're working towards the super awesome goal of this wonderful faith community that inspires and exalts all of its constituents. And then we confront a problem. Or top givers and influential volunteer leaders are performing terribly in their positions. There it is. There's nothing wrong with that happening. The question is, how do we behave once we get to that place? Leadership decided to close the daycare center and lay off staff. A board member told me he's not giving at all. So we have these concerns, we have these frustrations with each other. Now, in the course of our research, as we were studying organizations, studying leadership, studying teams, my children were getting older. We have a small organization called the Grenny family. We have 6 children, 3 control, 3 experimental. It's good research base. My wife and I believe that sample size is the key to good research. So, as our children were getting older, various of them had science fair projects they had to do. I tried to interest the older ones into doing social science type projects, and they weren't really interested in that. Finally, along comes Samuel. And Samuel one day has a science fair project due. I said, what are you thinking of doing? He says, I want to put little kids in some uncomfortable circumstance and then see how they behave. And at first I was a little discouraging of it. I said, I don't know if any of you have seen the old show, Kids Say the Darndest Things, right? But I said, kids don't have the same kind of social constraints that adults do. He goes, no, I know what I want to do. He says, just help me with the experiment. So I want to play for you the experiment, and then we'll talk about its implications.
We all know adults stink at talking about tough things. But how about little kids? Here's my experiment. Feed kids wretched brownies, then see if they'll tell you the truth, especially when they think it might hurt your feelings. First, I made the brownies. Lots of chocolate, eggs and flour, but instead of sugar, I put in salt. Lots of salt. There's no way they could like these better. Now I recruit kids of various ages for a taste test. I tell them I want to compare ordinary brownies to my special brownies. My dear grandmother's special recipe. My dear dead grandmother's special recipe. Then I give them $1 for being such a big help. My parents always taught me that if you want someone to like you, give them money. Okay, here goes. First, they ate the yummy sugar brownies. Next, they eat the salt bricks. Watch this girl. She can hardly keep from gagging. And now for the crucial moment. Will they tell me the truth and possibly offend me? I asked them to point to the brownies they like best. No surprise that some tried to spare my feelings. But watch, even the one who gagged? And how about really little kids? But do you want to know what they really thought? Here, guys, I have leftovers. Does anybody want seconds?
Isn't that amazing? I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. Now, different than you, when my wife and I watch this, it's a different experience because the subjects are neighbor kids, right? That little girl whose face was all retching up, she lives right next door to us. Her name is Hannah. She's the most blunt, outspoken girl in the world. And she's lying about the brownies. Now, here's the question. How many of us have been to that meeting? Have you been in that meeting before? How many of us been in a meeting where everybody knows that the brownies suck? But nobody's saying it. And if they do say it, where do they say it? Where do they say it? It's in the hallway after the meeting. That's where it comes out. Here's the point. Watching this experiment, I realized at what a remarkably young age, you and I draw a horrific conclusion. At about 3 or 4 years old, you and I start to believe a myth that causes mischief for the rest of our lives. It undermines our organizations. It undermines our families and all of our relationships. That myth is this, that you often have to choose between telling the truth and keeping a friend. It's the belief that you have to choose between the two. Truth-telling means losing friends, right? Keeping friends means compromising truth. It's the belief that you have to trade the two off against each other that causes mischief in all our relationships. You can measure the health of a relationship, a team, or an organization by measuring the number of undiscussables. The number of things that you and I believe you just can't talk about. Progress in organizations begins the moment we as leaders start to help people unwind that myth. So, here's what I advocate. Around principle number 1, big idea number 1, the principle of crucial conversations. Your job as a leader is to model, teach, coach, and measure a small number of the crucial conversations that most profoundly affect the mission you're trying to accomplish. Let me just give an illustration with churches. As we synthesize, as we work through all of this data in this study, we found there were 3 kind of patterns that most corresponded with dramatic differences in the health of a church. Now think about the same for your organization as well. But one is this, performance problems with volunteers or staff. Second, members who are struggling in sin or disconnecting from the church. That's a moment. There's a moment, and we all know that moment where somebody's starting to drift away or somebody's getting involved in habits and choices that are going to undermine their spiritual growth. And in that moment, when people see that, if they can't talk about the brownies, then disconnection is inevitable. Third, concerns with pastors. So when people in the congregation have concerns with pastoral leadership, do they step up to that crucial conversation? Is it an environment where that can occur? Or do junior pastors speak up or staff speak up the chain of command as well? If that can't happen, bad things occur. See, here's the principle. What we know is that crucial conversations are either a pit or a path. They're one or the other. They're either a pit that keeps us stuck and mired down and inhibits our capacity to achieve our growth and our mission, or they become a path upward. Here's the magic of it. What we know is that crucial conversations can become an acceleration of intimacy. And you know that. Crucial conversations held well. When we don't work around the truth, we work through it. When we find a way to absolutely respectfully and absolutely candidly discuss our concerns, it actually becomes a trust-building accelerant and builds intimacy of an unparalleled nature in organizations, in teams, and in families. Again, by way of illustration, as we looked at the top quartile of performers in church, those churches that were the healthiest in terms of financial strength, spiritual growth of members, membership growth, membership retention, staff strength, those in the top quartile were profoundly different in how they addressed these conversations. Those who were best at these conversations didn't do marginally better in membership growth, they did exponentially better. They didn't do marginally better in serving the interests and needs of the constituents, of the members. They did profoundly differently. They didn't do just a little better in staff strength or a little better in financial health. They were profoundly better. What I want you to understand is that this principle doesn't just define something around the margins. It is the core of a healthy culture in a family, a team, or an organization. Your job as a leader is to identify the 2 or 3 crucial conversations that most affect achievement of your mission. And then model, teach, coach, and measure how well you're doing as an organization. My promise to you, based on our research, is that improvement in that one area, just those crucial conversations, will affect every other dimension that you care about rapidly, dramatically. So, our challenge is to learn to focus on those. Not have them become the pit, but have them become the path. What we're trying to accomplish is using those as elevating experiences. Now, if you look at the analog in Scripture, now I have different eyes than a lot of us, but I hope you will after today as well, that this illuminates for you in organizations and teams and relationships things you didn't see before. But think about the Bible from this perspective. What is it, if not a history of crucial conversations? I mean, the book of Genesis, right? The creation begins with landscaping and ends with a crucial conversation, right? That's how it ends. The calling of Moses the prophet starts with a brush fire and ends with a crucial conversation with God. The road to Damascus begins with holding coats and ends with a very crucial conversation that had a transformative effect on a person. It's always that interpersonal dimension. It's always that human connection that accelerates our growth as human beings. So this is about us elevating the entire organization, not just achievement of our mission. Our research spans many, many different dimensions. We found that your individual influence is fundamentally a function of your ability to hold crucial conversations with your customers, with your board, with your colleagues. The quality and strength of a team, productivity. Now, the fourth one up there might cause some puzzling. Are there crucial conversations in a marriage? Well, just by way of illustration, I ran across this classified ad recently. I want you to listen carefully because it takes a little thought, a little attention. This comes from a man trying to sell his Suzuki motorcycle. He says in this ad, "This bike is perfect. It has 1,000 miles on it. It has had its 500-mile dealer service." In parentheses, he says, which was expensive. "It's been adult-ridden. All wheels have always been on the ground. I use it as a cruiser/commuter." And then here's the key. He says, "I'm selling it because it was purchased without proper consent of my loving wife." And then in parentheses adds, "Apparently, do whatever the hell you want doesn't mean what I thought." Now, men, I have a question for you. How many of us know what "do whatever the hell you want" means? How many of us know what that meant? Yeah. But here's the issue. When the game playing begins, we've got 2 choices. Remember what they are. Talk it out or what? Or act it out. And if you don't do the first, you will do the second. And it shows up in depreciation of motorcycles, among other things. What we know from our research is every one of those results is inextricably connected to our capacity to hold these conversations. So there's the big idea. Anytime you find yourself stuck, if you feel frustrated and limited in your potential to accomplish the important mission of your organization, if a relationship isn't where you know it could be, stop and ask the question, what's the crucial conversation we're either not holding or not holding well? Improve the quality of that, and you unleash potential. So, having started to notice this as a pattern in our research, we began looking for positive deviance. We started looking for people who face the same number of crucial conversations as you and I, but they handle them differently. They show up in a different way. What we write about in the book is 7 of these patterns. Now, they'll be very familiar to you. As you read them, you'll go, oh yeah, I do that, or so-and-so does that. They'll be very familiar, and they should be, because we found them from watching people like you when you're doing it well. I want to highlight one of them that deserves disproportionate attention. And to do so, I want to take you to a very crucial moment in my career. So I once worked with a very powerful CEO from a Fortune 50 company on a project that had global significance. I was thrilled, excited, and humbled to be part of this project. The CEO was kind of a gruff, austere man, very large and imposing, kind of quiet, and had this really sort of withdrawn demeanor to him. But we got to some level of rapport, and over a period of months developed a plan to deal with the issues that we were trying to address. One day we presented him to a management meeting, and after the meeting we were walking down the hall to his office. I was kind of bouncing in my step and feeling positive about our progress when, let's call him Bob, said to me, "Joseph, that didn't go so well." My spine stiffened. He said, "I'd like you to come into my office, and I'd like to debrief on that." Well, I started panicking. High stakes, right? Opposing opinions, strong emotions. We went and sat in his office, and he said, "Why don't you review with me the plan?" Well, I was puzzled. He and I had co-developed this plan over the previous 6 months. But I went ahead and started to review. I said, all right, the next step is diagnosis. We need to gather data and understand what the real issues are in the organization. He said, yeah, that's what I thought. He said, take that off the list. He said, we don't need to diagnose. We got more data around here that we need. He said, I just want to kill something, so let's get started. What's next on the list? Well, in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, just take it off the list. You don't get to say that. I'm thinking, we worked together on this. You understood this. Where is this coming from? So there's the moment. There's the moment where in my head that myth starts to emerge. And I start thinking to myself, do I tell the truth or keep a client? Which do I do? And then I recognize the false dichotomy. Then it occurred to me, yeah, I'm assuming you can't do both. So my question to you is, when you're in that moment, what do you say first? Having spent now over 10,000 hours watching those moments, observing them, coding, looking at outcomes, and then backtracking to see what led to success and what didn't, here's what we know. You have 2 tasks in what we call the hazardous half minute. In the first 30 seconds of a crucial conversation, there are 2 things which, if you do them, there's a 97% chance that you'll be heard. Now notice, I'm not saying they're going to agree with you. They may not. They may disagree. And it still may be a difficult conversation, but you will be heard. You'll have influence. You'll be able to engage in what we call dialogue. So, what do you have to do? Here's the first. Your first job, and please listen to how I characterize this. Your first job is to help them know. This isn't a trick. This isn't a technique. Your job is to help them know that you care about their interests, their problems, their concerns, almost as much as they do. That's what you have to do. As soon as you do that, they do this. As soon as you successfully create a condition we call mutual purpose, they go like this. They go, and then they start to listen. If they're not convinced it's true, if it's just some gimmick or technique that you're trying to pull off on them, then that won't happen, and they'll stay stiff, and they'll stay defensive, and they'll stay prepared for you. So that's the first. The second thing you have to do is this. You need to create a condition of safety that we call mutual respect. That means not just that they know that you care about their problems or their concerns, but they know that you care about them, that you fundamentally respect them as a human being. Now, how do you do that when somebody is behaving despicably? How do you create mutual respect with somebody that doesn't appear to deserve respect? Well, my friends, the problem is in us, not them. It's possible for us to create it, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So here I am with Bob. And the first thing I said to Bob was, Bob, I want you to know that I get it, you're the CEO here. You're the boss. And whatever you decide we're going to do on this plan, I'm going to support it as best I can. Now, with that said, I have some reasons to believe that if we don't diagnose, it could cause problems for us later. I'll be happy to share those with you if you'd like to hear them. But at the end of the discussion, it's your choice. Furthermore, if you believe there are things in this project that are just padding my fees and upping the cost of the project and not adding value, I want a relationship with you where you feel like you can confront that with me. I should have to answer for everything in this project. This sly grin crept up his face, and I knew I'd hit it right on the head. Instead of talking it out, he was acting it out. But now with a little safety, he said, go ahead, make your case. I made my case, and we ended up diagnosing. But more important than that, it set a pattern for how our relationship would work from that point forward. What he learned in that moment was, he's safe with me. I respect him, and we have mutual purpose. And it made it possible for us to achieve a level of candor that was otherwise unavailable. Here's what we know. From watching these conversations, we know that people never get defensive with you because of what you're saying. They get defensive with you because of why they think you're saying it. It's the intent, not the content, that provokes that defensiveness. Your job is to reassure them of the intent. First, purify your intent. But secondly, reassure it, create mutual purpose and mutual respect. And then they relax, and then they can listen. If you can create safety, it's possible to talk with almost anyone about almost anything. Let me illustrate. So we're down in the basement of my house, and Patrick is very quiet. And I said, Patrick, there's something I need to show you. But before I do, I need you to hear something. He was looking at the ground. And I said, and Patrick, I apologize for asking this, but I need you to look me in the eyes. I just need to know that you hear this. Finally, with great effort, he lifted his eyes up and locked them on mine. I said, Patrick, do you know that I love you? His eyes immediately filled with tears. And he said, yes, I do. I said, good. I said, and Patrick, do you know that I would never do anything if it weren't in your best interests? Do you know that? His lips started to quiver. And he said, yes, I do. I said, good. Then I said, there's something I need you to look at. And I showed him the evidence. And he started heaving and sobbing. And I said, Patrick, I don't think I would be a friend to you if I didn't let you be held accountable for what you did to me and my family. I intend to share this with the police, and it'll be up to you how you address that. And then through chokes and sobs, he said, I know I need to go to jail, but will you be there for me when I get out? And I said, yes, I will. If it's possible for me to tell somebody that I'm helping him get sent to jail and he can hear it, what else is possible for us to discuss? Ladies and gentlemen, the myth that we can't both tell the truth and keep a friend is at the heart of most of the dysfunction, most of what keeps us from achieving our potential. I hope our conversation today contributes to your capacity to do that it blesses your life as it has mine. Thank you very much.